I did want to start with, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what your role is here at Savannah?
Hello, my name is DeWone Bennet. I am a parent here at Savannah. I have a lovely year and a half old daughter who has been here since end of July 2024. And so, a little bit about myself. I am a therapist. I have a PhD in clinical psychology. I have been in private practice. So I have my own private practice. I've been in private practice for about 14 years. I specialize in a couple of different things from trauma to relationships to depression, anxiety, work-life balance. Do a lot of work with couples and families and things of that nature. And I'm just happy to be here and be able to have the discussion about parenting and my Savannah and all the great things that it brings, but also be able to provide some awareness and education on how is it being a parent and managing the adjustments and things of that nature.
How did you end up hearing about Savannah?
For the first 8 months of my daughter's life, we had a nanny. And although the nanny situation was great, it allowed my wife to stay at home with the baby. Nannies are people, right? They get sick, their kids get sick, they take off. And me and my wife are both in very demanding careers and jobs. And we just realized it really wasn't working for us because obviously the nanny would take off a lot more than we would want. And so we were just talking about, hey, it's about time to start looking at daycares and things of that nature. My wife was apprehensive simply because, to that point, they had been at home together. And so the transition of dropping the baby off at daycare and, leaving the baby. And then the next day, my wife was like, wow, Instagram is listening to me, right? And the ad for My Savannah popped up, and we were able to see that they have the kind of the co-working space or the parenting space, the parenting club area. And it just seemed an ideal fit. So it just came across our Instagram. I think we got back from Mexico a couple days later. We immediately scheduled an appointment to come visit, and that day we signed up.
You guys are in a bit of a unique position because you have an older sibling as well that you said your daughter was one, correct?
Yeah, she's 1.5, yeah.
And then you have a
11-year-old.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was your experience with your 11-year-old? And did y'all put them in daycare? And that was, 10 years ago. How different is this experience now than it was then?
Oh, it's totally different. I think with my son, we planned for him. We took the time to prepare. We scouted out the daycares and all that. So yeah, we ended up putting him in daycare after my wife's maternity leave ended at about 4 months. I think his daycare was probably 500 yards from my wife's office. And so we took a look at some daycares, got an idea of kind of the curriculum or what they do and things of that nature. And then we moved him. So originally we had him at a daycare that was close to the office. And so he was able to be in that daycare until he was about 3. And then from there, he transitioned to K-3 at a private school. With my daughter wasn't planned, right? She was the miracle child, right? She was, a blessing for our family. And so with her, we put a little more time. We were a little older, had a little more resources available to us. So, we decided that, hey, staying home was probably going to be the best option. And then, as you know, we transitioned eventually to becoming part of the My Savannah family.
What are some of the things that you're approaching from a different mindset with your daughter than you did with your son 10 years ago that come to mind?
As you get older, you learn more. And I think with my daughter, one of the differences, we have the experience of raising my son, and I think we've done a great job. My son is a very kind, gentle, empathetic kid. He's very smart in school as well. And so I think we did a great job with him. But, I always tell parents, if you have multiple kids and you're parenting them the same way, then there's probably a kid that's not getting what they need, right? So there has to be that adjustment and understanding that, hey, what are we going to do differently for this kid? And I think we just learned more about parenting. I think one of the biggest adjustments is kind of starting over, right? My son was 9 when my daughter was born. And so being able to have to start over and think about how do we travel again and how do we do date nights and trips and things of that nature. That was an adjustment, but just really trying to make sure that we were both available to spend more time. Immediately with my son, my wife and I were back to work. I was still had my company in Oklahoma. I had a bunch of employees I was managing and things of that nature. So I was constantly in and out of the office. My wife was grinding it out at work. And so I don't think we were able to be as present on a day-to-day because, we were 29, 30 years old, trying to really get settled in our careers. I think with my daughter, we spend a lot more quality time with her. Once she leaves here, she goes home. My wife spends a lot of time with her, and then I come in and I spend a lot of time with her. So I think we've been able to give more quality time on a day-to-day basis than probably what we were able to give my son. So I'm happy and proud of that.
It's so amazing that you have the wherewithal to recognize that you're doing things differently. And even the statement that you made that if you're giving each of your kids the same treatment, then one of them probably isn't getting enough is such a new way of thinking about it. And I think we're kind of changing this generational narrative around parenting where our parents, my parents especially, and a lot of families here that I've spoken with have that if it worked for us, it'll work for you. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it's, this idea that, the things that they did in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s should be the same thing you're doing today. And I just can't wrap my head around why people don't recognize that there could be a better way. We have new access to information. We have new access to resources. We have new things that we can leverage to make our kids' experience better than ours. And isn't that the whole point of parenting, to give your kids what you didn't have and to set them up for success and to continue that progression forward as opposed to just making it consistent throughout the same way? What are some things that come to mind for you that you think stand out in your work that can maybe illuminate some things for parents that maybe feel like, my parents did it and I'm going to do it the same way and that's just how it is?
One of the things I say is that at some point your kids are going to go to therapy and they're going to talk about you. And although you can't control them going to therapy and talking about you, you do have some control of what they're talking about in therapy. And so I think what happens is sometimes we can get into lazy parenting. And lazy parenting is, well, I'm going to just do what my parents did. It worked for me. I'm okay. I'm successful. But ask yourself, what are you in therapy talking about with your therapist? Are you talking about life right now? Or are you talking about things from your childhood? And so I think one of the things that's important for parents to do is to understand that as we evolve and we grow, we know better, we do better. And it's okay to say, hey, as a parent, I don't know what I'm doing. Sometimes that's the best thing to say. Sometimes the best thing to say is, I'm overwhelmed and I don't know what I'm doing, right? Because in order to solve a problem, you have to be able to acknowledge it. And once you can acknowledge it, then you can do something about it. And so I think if your way of thinking about parenting is that, hey, the way that I was raised in the 60s, 70s, or 80s is going to apply now that we have technology, cell phones, we have all this access of information, then I think, unfortunately, your kids are probably going to end up in therapy talking about you at some point. But I think, in wise parenting, I think wise parenting is open to suggestions, open to feedback. I think when you have here at Savanna, you have the co-working space and you have parents who are here working and engaging and communicating with each other and giving each other advice and talking. You have mothers, some are here, their children are 4 months old, 5 months old. They're still dealing with, postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety. And as a result, having that community feel and having opportunities to engage and talk to other parents is extremely important. Our parents didn't do that back in the day because they were embarrassed to say they didn't know how to do something. So I think nowadays, parents, there's information out there. And as much as you can, access information. Now, be mindful in the type of information you're getting. And if you're only getting it from one source, then you're probably going to be limited in what you know. But there's books, there's podcasts, there's spaces like this, there's parent groups and clubs. Find ways to get involved in communities that are engaged in helping parents become better parents simply because they're learning more about their blind spots as parents.
You said that lazy parenting is doing what your parents did. And I've always grappled with that idea of how do you call people out whenever it comes to this conversation of parenting. That leads really well into the next kind of avenue that I wanted to explore with you, which is really effective communication. Mm-hmm. And I think, like you said, the uniqueness here at Savanna with moms and parents' ability to create a community, but also leverage their relationship with teachers. Yes. And in a traditional daycare setting, there is no interaction between parent and teacher. God forbid there's interaction between parent and parent alone. We have all of that here at Savanna. So what comes to mind for you on what effective communication looks like from parents to teachers when it comes to that remark that you just made of, hey, I don't know everything. And that's okay. Teachers don't know everything. Parents don't know everything. But whenever we come together and we build that community where parents are helping teachers and teachers are helping parents, it can only help this environment that we're trying to create. And that's what all these people that we're talking to that are professionals in the space are saying. That environment is that third teacher, right? Mm-hmm. And the more that we can come together to create an environment that includes all of us, the better it's going to be. What comes to mind to you for effective communication between parents and teachers?
I think parents, we have to do a better job of listening. In the same way that we have our own personal blind spots, we do have blind spots in regards to our children. Sometimes we enable certain behaviors that are not going to be conducive to their success in society or our classroom setting. And if we have teachers that are approaching us in a way that allows us to have a discussion, then I think being able to listen to what they say. I think sometimes where teachers can start the conversation off wrong is it kind of starts off as they're being judgmental towards the child or the parent, the parenting. And I think most parents are going to be very sensitive to how we parent. So I think as parents, we have to do a better job of effective listening. You said it earlier. We have to expose our kids to things that are going to make them uncomfortable so they can practice being uncomfortable, because in life, that's the only way they're going to grow. And sometimes a parent may say, hey, I think a kid can benefit over here. Or a teacher may say that. Sometimes we should ask, hey, well, tell me more about that. What are you thinking? Instead of just immediately becoming defensive and rejecting the notion that maybe this teacher who spends 6, 7, 8 hours a day with her kids can have a perspective or a position that can really help them grow and flourish. And obviously, a lot of teachers are in this field because they want to help. They want to see their kids become successful.
What comes to mind to you for ways that parents can be more receptive of that feedback and not put their walls up and say, oh, well, you don't understand and you don't have all the context that I have. And, instead of being defensive, be more open to that collaboration that we're looking for here.
I think you hit it on the head when you said collaboration. I think here at Savanna, they have parent-teacher conferences. And somebody may say, well, why does my 1-year-old need a parent-teacher conference? Well, they're offering information and feedback that can really help your kid grow and develop because they're spending that time. And so we have to view it as a collaborative relationship. We have to view it as, hey, as a parent, I have a certain level of expertise and knowledge about what my kid's capable of doing. And as a teacher who's challenging them and teaching them things every day, they're going to have a certain level of knowledge and expertise about what's going on with our child. So I believe if we treat it as a collaborative relationship, and we don't treat it as, hey, I'm just dropping my kid off. If we really say, hey, this person is investing in my child, being able to learn about, okay, well, how do you see my child? I know my child from what I see, but how do you see my child? What are they learning? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? Because if I'm aware early in age at 1, 2, 3 that they have, okay, maybe their weaknesses, they're not good at following directions. Now I can take that home and be able to help them build on that area that they're not so good in. But if we're not willing to listen, if we're not willing to get feedback, then all we're going to do is move to another daycare, move to another school, move to another learning environment, and repeat the same problems over and over again. And then we're going to blame everybody else for the things that are going wrong with our kids instead of saying that, hey, I never listened and I should have.
It's almost like we need to redefine parent-teacher conference in a preschool setting. And it's not about the kid, it's about the parents.
Yeah.
It's about that communication and an opportunity for parents to listen to these teachers that are investing so much of their time and their lives with your children. And what better opportunity than to make that formal, than to make that a requirement. And I think that's one thing that's interesting here is this encouragement for parents to be involved and to take charge of their kids' education and contribute to it, as opposed to just saying, oh, well, this is the best place for my kids, so they're just going to come here and that's it. I'm going to continue doing whatever I want to do.
You know, one of the tricky parts about it is, and you see this, parental anxiety, right? You have a lot of parents, and you see a lot of it, especially with moms who may have parental anxiety. I'm a bad mom. I'm not a good mom. Am I doing something right? Am I doing something wrong? And naturally, if somebody wants to sit down and meet with you about your kid, your defenses are up, right? Oh, hold on. This is triggering my parental anxiety. Now you're going to tell me all the ways in which I'm doing things wrong as a parent. When reality is, this is an opportunity to help you grow and develop. And there's an opportunity for you as the parent to give me some feedback as the teacher on ways that I can better support your child. That's what we want. We want to send our kids to schools where the people are invested in their development. I don't want to send my kid to a school where they're just another number. No, that's why we're here at my Savanna, right? There's plenty of daycares where we can go to that are closer to the house, right? But I know here they're invested in Danielle's growth and development. And for me, that's extremely important. When you care for my child in the way that I care for them, I feel safe with sending my kids there. So when parents and teachers can collaborate, and as a result, these can be opportunities to kind of help reduce some of that anxiety.
What does a healthy parent-to-parent relationship look like when it comes to working together again in that collaboration to create an environment for our kids. What does that communication look like from parent to parent?
I think it's being honest about maybe some of the struggles that they're having as a parent, right? I think if I can communicate with another parent about maybe some of my shortcomings or my insecurities as a father, and then to get feedback from them that they're having this now it feels more real. Now it feels like more like, not that I'm failing, but I'm just a parent and I'm having this struggle. But I also think with parents being able to do things together. Here, Parents Night Out is promoted. You come here on a random Tuesday, there's parents in here, the moms are laughing and joking and talking. And I'm sure a lot of those conversations are around their kids. Now, for us, we're transplants. We're not from here. I'm originally from California. My wife's from Oklahoma. And so being able to be in a space with other parents that our kids are similar in age, being able to share stories and get feedback from them and learn about programs that they're doing. What learning programs are you doing with your kid? Oh, I've never heard about that. Let's try that. I think the parent-to-parent interaction, again, if it's collaborative, if, hey, we're working together because our kids are sharing the same space, they're breathing the same air, we're in this space together, it goes miles in reducing the anxiety, but also ensuring that I have a sense of community and support. And I think that always can help.
What does the healthy division of labor in childhood look like between a man and a woman, a husband and a wife?
The goal is to help. The goal is to help. But it's not even to be 50-50. It's what are my strengths? What are your strengths? And how do we figure out how to put these pieces of the puzzle together? And if I got to carry 80% of the load because right now I have that energy, that's what I'm going to do. And hopefully the day when I only have 20%, you can carry the 80. And so trying to figure out, not necessarily look at these are your gender roles, these are my gender roles, but hey, our job is to raise this kid, these kids, this family to the best as possible and whatever works best. I think that's always the goal.
You know, you've got all these self-help books and it's all about what you can do to biohack your way into a new morning routine and fitness routine and all these things. But there's not a ton of content around how you can biohack a marriage and biohack parenting a toddler, right? What advice do you have for new parents that are coming into this with a healthy mindset, but are intimidated, that feel that anxiety, maybe are having some postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety that they're not sure how to deal with? What does the typical solution in your practice look like between parents that may have had a healthy relationship before having kids, but now have started to find some turmoil now that they're under the stress of raising a human, right? What are some things that come to mind for you?
One of the first things I tell people is this, especially when I'm talking with couples. I think that if I think about my career, I have to do 24 continuing education units a year. My wife, she has about 20 or 30 hours of education she has to learn. And this is for her job. This is for my job. But how many hours do we invest into learning about relationships, our spouses? What's our continuing education for our relationship? Is it reading books together? Is it going out on dates? Is it being more curious about my partner's day? How do we invest that same amount of continuing education into our families, into our relationships that we do into our careers? Because we do it in our careers. We go to these trainings that we hate and that we're forced to do to maintain our certifications. But what about the training for our relationships? Most of us get married, start to have kids, and whatever door life opens for us, that's the door we walk through. We're not planning, we're just responding. And I think the goal is, if you want to stay connected as a couple, you have to prioritize the relationship. Yes, the kids need time, they need attention, but if your kids are your number one priority, then I can imagine that your relationship is struggling. And I will say this, and I'll say why. At some point, your kids are going to get older, and they're going to leave. Whether they're 18 or you got a baby genius and they go to college at 14. But they're going to leave your home, and they're going to have their lives. But even before that, once they get about middle school age, they start spending more time with their friends, and they're in sports. Well, you've invested all this time and energy into their growth and their development. Everything's been about them. Vacations have been about them. Everything you do was about the kids. Well, now, as a result, people have naturally grown apart. And now that the kids are gone, you want to reinvest in a marriage, and now you guys are like strangers. So if two people spend time dedicating their lives to invest in each other, then their family naturally is going to benefit. Everyone in that household, their kids are going to benefit. I don't know how many kids have come in and say, well, my parents were very, very happy and had a lot of vacations together and had healthy communication. Therefore, I felt neglected. I don't think I've ever heard that. But I have heard about the parents who stayed together And although their marriage was not necessarily what it needed to be, they stayed together for the sake of the kids, but their kids didn't learn healthy relationships because their parents didn't engage in it. And so I think for parents, they have to understand that there's still importance to making an investment into the person you married. You married that person, you said, hey, I'm here for you, I'm going to be there for you. And the kids shouldn't get in the way of that because that can cause resentment in some regards to your children.
Well, I think there always has to be that push towards recognizing that your kids are watching you. And we hear that as parents and we recognize that in their screen time and there's you on your phone. But there's also you speaking to your wife or your husband. There's also you investing in yourself and your own health. And one of the things I've come across recently is as a working mom to let your kids see you working, to let them see you working hard, to let them see you be a professional and let them see you investing in yourself because you taking care of yourself in theory should make your marriage better. And then you investing in your marriage should make your parenting experience better for your kids. You need that conflict. You need that resolution. You need that dysfunction and repair to teach kids what that looks like, to create a healthy relationship. If it's all just sunshine and rainbows all the time, they're not going to learn anything.
I tell parents all the time, oh, we don't argue in front of the kids. Well, why not? Oh, we just don't think it's productive. Well, if your kids are going to grow up thinking that arguing is detrimental to the relationship because they watch their parents be together 40, 50 years, but they never seen them argue. And obviously, if you're going to argue in front of the kids, you have to repair in front of them. So if we're going to have a fight about bills or something like that in front of the kids, then we have to be able to sit down and hug and cuddle and things of that nature in front of the kids so they can see that you can have conflict and you can resolve that conflict in a healthy way. Just because we're arguing doesn't mean I love you. That just means you have your facts, I have my facts, and we're at a disagreement about who facts is the decision that we're going to make. And so I think we have to show our kids the realities of the world. That's why preparing your kids is so important. You know, we talk about parents who may be helicopter parents or snowplow parents, right? Kind of trying to remove all barriers for their kids' success. Well, unfortunately, those kids are going to struggle the most as adults. Our kids are children from birth to 17. And then from 18 up, they're adults. And so we're preparing them to be adults. And no matter what they do as adults, they're going to have conflict. They're going to have adversive situations. And the best thing that we can do is, while at home, showing them that people can have adversity, they can have negative experiences, but they can overcome it. And that investment in just being normal in your home can go a long way in your children's development.
Dysfunction and repair, and like you said, the dynamic of parents that have been together for 50 years and have never argued is such a fallacy in this world because we are seeing it in many kids that are in their 20s and 30s that don't know how to function in the real world because their parents never prepared them. But I do think that there's a separate element that is this conversation around what is the difference between enabling versus positive reinforcement, because I do know that there's a lot of times where parents aren't able to recognize that, your kids are trying to teach you something and they're trying to manipulate you essentially. I know that's a harsh word to say when it comes to your 2-year-old, but that's the reality is they are testing you. They are seeing what they can get away with. They're seeing what combination of actions they can take to control the desired outcome that they're looking for, as opposed to a parent creating boundaries and healthy expectations with their kids that allows them to grow. What's that dynamic and what's that balance between not enabling your kids and giving them everything they want versus preparing them for their future? Like, you don't want the dictator either. What does that balance look like to prepare kids for what the real world has in store?
I think one of the first questions you have to ask yourself is, am I preparing my kids or are they preparing me? And I think understanding that sometimes setting healthy boundaries with your kids, allowing your no's to be no's, allowing, these responsibilities, making sure your kids have responsibilities. Kids at 2 can pick up behind themselves. If your kid is 8, 9, 10 years old and you're still constantly picking up behind them, you're teaching them to have a sense of entitlement that people will do things for them. They're not going to know how to do things because they didn't learn at home. Home is where we learn how to interact and engage with the world. And so if we are limiting our kids' exposure to life, we're not preparing them for life. We're preparing them to be living in our basements until they're 50, 60 years old. And so I think a healthy balance is understanding that, what do I want from my kids? Do I want them to be kids that are still living with me, asking me for money, paying my bills? One of the things that annoy me sometimes is when I have a mom calls and they were like, hey, I want to schedule an appointment for my son. Or it's usually, I want to schedule an appointment for my baby or my son. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, how old are they? Because I only work with certain age groups. And they're like, oh, they're 35. And I'm thinking like, what? That kid, that 35-year-old adult can't schedule their own appointment. And so I think the reality is once you've shown your kids that they don't have to do it, they won't do it. And so what we have to understand is, again, are we preparing our kids or are they preparing us? And if they're preparing us, then we know that we're not necessarily setting them up for the world to actually have to deal with any resistance that they may encounter.
I think it's even harder for two parents to come together to both be consistent in that. What advice would you give somebody who is a parent who recognizes that emotional intelligence and understands, hey, this isn't really what they're trying to do. They're trying to get what they want. And maybe my spouse is giving it to them and they're not realizing that.
Couples should spend time checking in with each other. How are things in life? How are things at home? How are you feeling? And I think when you have opportunities to have daily check-ins with your spouse, you can bring up things that maybe you've witnessed that wasn't as helpful as it should be. You can have opportunities for feedback. I think what ends up happening is sometimes, even from parent to parent, if one parent is questioning that parent's actions, then they feel like, oh, you're saying I'm a bad parent or I can't do it. So I think if you want to create a healthy dynamic, then parents have to be able to figure out how to get on the same page, because hopefully that's the goal. Hopefully the goal is that we are on the same page about how we're parenting, because if not, you're going to get triangulation happening. Your kids are going to divide you. And, you know, my son's going to ask me, Dad, can I have ice cream? I'm going to say no. And then he's going to go downstairs and ask Mom, because we haven't had a conversation about when it's okay to have ice cream. Are these appropriate ice cream hours? Can he have ice cream? We haven't had those conversations. So I think one of the things that I always say when my son is, when he asks me a question is, can I have this? Can I have that? I say, well, hold on, let me check in with Mom, make sure, you know, we're good, and vice versa. I think when you can do that to make sure we're on the same page, I think that's always healthy and important.
I love the phrases, how are you complicit in creating the conditions you don't want? What are some things that we can do as a community to help encourage and support people that may be doing things that we see them doing and they may not be aware of it? Like, how do you have those conversations with another parent about wanting what's best for them, but not wanting to judge, make them feel like you're judging them, and, you know, have those hard conversations from parent to parent, essentially?
I think it's important to get to know that person, especially if we're in the same educational community, if we're in the same childcare, community. Because I think, unfortunately, what ends up happening is we feel that the way we do things is typically right. I'm not always aware of people's cultural background. Your cultural background determines a lot of how you parent. And so I think if we get to know a person, then we can have a better understanding of, hey, what are their cultural values? How were they raised? And also, once somebody knows you, they're more likely to listen and take on your feedback. So I think if you have people within your space and you're familiar with them, great. But if you're not, get to know them first. We should be curious. Instead of going in with judgment, be curious, show curiosity. Hey, I want to get to know you a little more. Tell me a little bit about your family, these things, because sometimes we can get that question answered about why they're doing something by simply showing some curiosity. But if that doesn't work, trying to pull them to the side, not calling them out in front of others, pulling them to the side, hey, I want to talk to you about something that's important. It's been on my heart and my mind. I think that's always important, but get to know them first, for sure.
What comes to mind whenever you think about these trends and how they're changing and how this is going to affect this next generation? Are there things that you're looking forward to?
I do a lot of corporate training. So I go to a lot of companies, and mental health awareness month is next month. So, on my calendar, I'm going into different corporations talking about the importance of mental health and leadership and overcoming mental health stigma. But what I've also started to get requests from companies is things about parenting advice, ways to talk with employees about parenting and how to deal with, kids who are sick when it comes to work or just in general. And I think what you're starting to see is companies understand that, hey, I'm working with a whole person. I'm working with somebody who has not just work on their plate, they have family, relationships, they have these things happening. So I'm looking for just opportunities to continue to do things like this, podcasts, talking about family, talking about development, understanding that we all may go about it differently, but we all have a similar goal, and that's to raise creative, productive members of society, people who are healthy and can go out in the world and thrive. And what does that look like? How do we get that? So something that I'm looking forward to just in the world of mental health is just continuously educating families on the importance of emotional well-being and wellness, but also understanding that it's important to be resilient too. You want to raise kids who have grit and resiliency. So having that message, talking about that a lot. I'm talking with some law students next week about the importance of grit, right, and resiliency. So if we're having that conversation when we're in law school, how important is it to start having that conversation when they're 2 and 3 and 4? Because we're going in a world that is sometimes can be confusing and you may not always fit in, but if you have grit, you can kind of push through.
I'm so glad you brought up the business community because, if you look at that pyramid of taking care of yourself, taking care of your marriage, taking care of your family, a big part of that is work. It's like we talked about those hours that you're not spending with your kids, and business communities are now starting to recognize that if you take care of the people that work for you, just like we as a community want to take care of our teachers, we want to take care of each other. If you take care of your employees, they're probably going to work harder for you, right? Do you have any experience with encouraging businesses to help? Maybe it's subsidizing childcare or other avenues that make this parenting life easier so that they can be a better employee. Do you have any examples of that?
Man, there's some phenomenal companies out here that, because of their kind of industrial organizational psychology department, has learned that whether they have on-site childcare facilities or they built their headquarters next to hospitals and schools, things of that nature, right? Making sure parents have access to their kids. You see a lot of companies starting to do this, or they have this going. And so being able to create spaces where parents can have access to their kids, I think is extremely important. 20, 30 years ago, it's probably unheard of for parents to receive a call while at work and check on their kids and things of that nature. Now you see companies are okay. Hey, you have the call, take care of the kids, things of that nature. You have kids on Zoom calls in the background screaming and making noise. You hear people that are more comfortable and understanding of that. So one of the things that it's encouraging to see is the way in which, even in these corporate spaces, people understand this is a whole person. They have a whole life. And the more we're understanding and we're flexible with them, the more loyal they'll be to us, and they'll work hard because they value the environment that they're in. That's why you have parents here who work hard to keep things clean and keep things involved, because they value the space and they value how they're treated in the space.
One of the things I love asking people is, what is something that you've changed your mind on? And it could be a week ago, a year ago, 10 years ago. What are things that you're challenging yourself on when it comes to your own growth?
I spent so many years in school, I got away from reading, leisure reading for a long time. And over probably the last 7, 8 years, I've gotten back into reading a lot, right? Becoming back to being an avid reader. So I'm constantly reading new things and changing information. And so one of the things that I've tried to coin myself on as a parent is 15 minutes is better than no minutes. And so if I find myself just having 15 minutes where I'm doing anything, let me go in and mess with my son. Let's go wrestle. Let's go play. Let me go take my daughter for a walk. The other day, she wanted to go for a walk. I was like, I got 5 minutes before a meeting. And I was like, you know what? Let's go for a walk. Now, her mother presented food and she changed her mind. But I think for me is trying to make sure that I'm depositing time, care, and love into my children, into my family. I think that has been important. I think sometimes we look at it as, well, I don't have an hour. I don't have 2 hours. 15 minutes is no minutes. So for me, that's a big thing. I think in my career, one of the things that I've changed is understanding that I don't always know everything. And I'm going to learn more about how to help people by listening to them. And if I got to listen for an hour just to be able to help them, then that's what I'm going to do. And realizing that the more you listen, the more you know, the more you can help. And so being able to listen to people's stories and appreciate their different experiences. I understand that not everyone was raised in the same way or where I was raised, but just appreciating that people are different. People have unique experiences. And if I can appreciate their experiences, this is just going to make me a better, smarter person.
The goal of this podcast is to challenge the status quo, is to challenge education, to challenge the system, to challenge parents to be better parents, for educators to be better educators, for teachers to be better teachers. What advice would you, maybe not even someone at Savanna, maybe just somebody who's, a new parent that's getting into this, and, what are some final words that you may want to leave them with on this whole parenting thing and this journey through life?
Put yourself in spaces to be uncomfortable as a parent. And what I mean by uncomfortable is maybe you're not the parent who's used to your kid crying, but understanding that maybe they need to learn to self-soothe, and that's uncomfortable for you. challenge yourself to be uncomfortable. Maybe you need to challenge yourself because you're not really a good interviewer, but there's a new job that you really, really want that will give you the flexibility that you need to be more involved as a parent. All right, challenge yourself for that interview. Challenge yourself, constantly challenge yourself. Because if you're constantly challenging yourself, you're constantly growing. And sometimes it's challenging you, challenging your children. Remember, again, this has been a message consistently throughout the podcast is we are preparing young people to be adults. And sometimes a lot of that preparation is allowing them to do things that we weren't able to do, or maybe that we're afraid of. A lot of times, unfortunately, as parents, our depression, our anxiety is transferred onto our children, and they are scared of things that they have no reason to be scared of. So if we're challenging ourselves more and they see that, we can challenge our kids, we challenge our relationships. If we're constantly pushing ourselves and growing, then we'll feel like we lived a complete life. So challenge yourself. That's the simple advice that I have is challenge yourself to grow.
Thank you so much for your time today, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I hope that this conversation helps make some people feel a little less alone, and hopefully a couple nuggets of wisdom that they can take into their own lives.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.